We had really bad news this week out of Israel, of course. Really horrific stuff that's still ongoing there, unfortunately. A horrible attack by Hamas on civilians that is really pretty unspeakable barbarism, honestly. I mean, that's I think the only way you could describe what's coming out of there. And we actually have a story that is related to this to some degree, or I guess directly, which is the Minister of National Security over in Israel announced that they're going to loosen their gun laws, at least to some degree, in the wake of this attack, to try and arm as many civilians or Israelis as possible. So, they are undertaking a number of measures, but Israel actually has some fairly strict gun laws, at least relative to the United States. And so, I'm sure a lot of American gun owners are not going to see these changes as something that gets them much closer to our system here, of course. But they have made a number of changes, including there's an interview you have to do when you obtain your gun carry permit that has to be in person. They've moved that to being a phone interview. You do see that occasionally in the United States as well in some of the stricter areas. But, they increased the number of rounds you can buy if you have a permit, which is not something that, is pretty foreign for us, from 50 to 100. They've done a number of things like in Israel, apparently you have to maintain a training schedule in order to keep your firearms. And so if you don't do the required training, you have to turn in your guns. And now they're saying that people who've turned in their guns for that reason in the last 6 months can go and pick them back up. And additionally, they have a permit to purchase system there. And they have allowed anyone who had a permit to purchase but didn't use it by its effective date to go and use it now. So, a number of changes with the goal of allowing more people to be armed in the wake of this widespread terror attack on civilians that has seen all sorts of horrific incidents of murder and beheadings and sexual violence and just indescribable stuff that I'm sure most of you have already seen news of to this point. But it has led to some reform, at least emergency temporary reform of Israeli gun laws at this point.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that, this keeps happening globally, but, between this and Ukraine, you're starting to see at least some governments recognizing at least the value or sometimes the occasional necessity of this decentralized form of defense for their civilians. You saw a similar thing play out in Ukraine in the initial invasion of when Russia invaded. This is, as you pointed out, slightly different than the way the Ukrainians handled it. There's not people handing out rifles in the streets to able-bodied men. It's still, a regulated process that's going on, but it is still noteworthy that, as you pointed out, they had fairly strict gun laws before this, and that they're, out of necessity, having to at least loosen those somewhat to allow the civilian populace to defend themselves and to get engaged in this, what's becoming a pretty nasty war. So,
right. It's not the same level as what happened in Ukraine, where they handed out, 10,000 rifles in the street. Right. And they changed their laws on self-defense in their Congress there. But this is sort of an emergency action taken by a minister of national security that mildly loosens the gun laws. His estimates did put it at several thousand people will be affected by this. Israel is not a very large country,
right?
Obviously compared to the United States. And so that is a pretty significant number of people that he gave a couple different estimates for these different rule changes and how many people they'd affect. So, it's, and Israel is obviously also a country that has a lot of military members in service at any given time,
Right.
due to the nature of, being surrounded by, oftentimes by enemy states who have invaded them a number of times in the past, and then also being continually harassed by these terror groups, just not to the level that we've seen here recently.
Sure.
But yeah, no, it does show directionally it's the same impulse, obviously, to allow people to arm themselves and resist an invasion by, a group that wants to kill them,
Right.
if not worse. Right. So, that was one of the developments that happened in Israel. Of course, they are obviously they're at war now with Hamas, and we would expect to see more violence in the coming weeks and months. And civilians in Israel are obviously a target in this. They've always been, but this is sort of an unprecedented situation. It's the worst attack since the worst single day of mass killings of Jewish people since the Holocaust, is my understanding. So it's a really different situation there now, and it'll be something to watch as to whether they continue to loosen their gun laws in the wake of this. Some of this is undercut by just serving in the military. There is I think mandatory for most men. So the able-bodied men are all going to be called up to be armed by the military. So that sort of is a bit different than what you would see in the United States or somewhere else with a much larger population. But but it's certainly the case that I would imagine a lot of people there would want to be armed inside their own homes at this point.
That's a good point, though.
Really obvious reasons. But yeah, it's sad day in Israel. And we're praying for the victims there.
Absolutely.
And and we'll of course continue to follow this. And I think it's also probably having an effect here in the United States as well on American Jews who probably are worried themselves. You've seen obviously rallies in support of this barbaric attack throughout the United States, not huge rallies, but still people openly celebrating this. And so understandably, I'm sure people are worried here too. Anti-Semitism has a very long history throughout the world, including here in the United States, even today. And so we've talked to a number of Jewish groups in the past on the show about the effort to arm American Jewish population as well. And I would imagine that's going to there's going to be an effect on that as well from all of this. So these are the sort of things that we're going to be following here as this unfolds. Obviously, the main thrust of the news of this is on the attacks and on the war. And, there are a lot of really good sources of information for that. We, of course, are focused on gun policy. So that's where our priority will be as this all unfolds and we continue to report on it.